Well, welcome to the Great Old Ones channel. Here I talk about gaming and role-playing games in specific. Again, tonight I'm going to go back and talk a little more about first edition Dungeons and Dragons, and we'll dive a little more into the ADDICT document that we had done last Thursday. If you hadn't seen that video already, go ahead and look through the playlist that I have there and choose that one, and we'll get ready to continue on with this one right here. Again, I'm going to be talking with Doom's Words again, and him and I are going to, let's see, talk more about the ADDICT document. Let me go ahead and bring him on here. Where is he at? I wish I could remember how to do this every week. Stage, one person, copy invite link. You would figure I would be okay at this by now. Add. Oh, there he is. All right. Hey, there we are there.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Apparently I am technically challenged here. People again.
I was challenged cutting a pizza.
Oh yeah, cutting a pizza. Well, I got to put my readers on again here. And go back to it. Yeah, welcome back again, and we'll dive right back into and talk more about the ADDICT document. And like we'd mentioned last time, this was by David M. Prada, in March of 2006, and here we are again, exactly 20 years later, talking about it again, hanging on to the glory of the old games that should not go away, because this is one of the best. And it isn't the first one I started playing, but it's the first one that I really grabbed a good love of. So I'm always willing to talk about this, and I like to talk about this with people who happen to know what they're doing, and I assume that would be you. So we'll go with it.
Assumptions are dangerous.
Yeah. Well, if you recall, the last time we'd been talking about encounters, combat, and initiative, and we went through a lot of that stuff in this document about all of that. Well, this week we left off in part 3. Both parties declare their intentions, and this is the beginning of the actual combat round itself. We've already resolved what happens for surprise and no surprise and that sort of thing, and we'll jump back into it here with this one. And since I can't read that tiny reading on my screen, I've got another copy of it pulled over here to the side, and I can read things out. We'll see what we can do to get through this as far as the combat round goes, and then if we still got a little bit of time left this evening, we'll jump back into some of the early pre-genitors. We'll back into, I thought about, we talk about at least Eldritch Wizardry and where their attempts there to divvy up how the combat round and that kind of stuff was supposed to work. Again, like we mentioned the last time we talked, the assumption was as you were a war gamer and you kind of knew how war games worked when you started playing this. There wasn't really a whole lot of clear rules for new people. And this ADDICT document really helped new people figure out how this stuff was supposed to work.
Yeah, especially given the time that it came out, right? So it came out a little bit right around the period of 4E, when a bunch of people who might have been newer 3E players or 3.5E or whatever had jumped ship, and this was sort of a presentation to help them figure out how this stuff goes. Because the old grognards and stuff, they had their own ways of doing things, and to the best of my knowledge, this is the only document, or at the very least the first document, that condensed it all together in a somewhat readable form and showed people what to do.
A little bit different organization that was with the other books, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, part 3, both parties declare their intentions. All right. A, the DM should mentally note what actions the monsters plan to take prior to knowing what the PCs will do. Right? Well, because both sides, right? The Dungeon Masters plays the sides of the monsters, where the players play the side of the heroes. Each player should describe what his character will do this round. Right? Remember, the round it's a minute of time. Right? So a lot can happen in that minute of time. Main thing there was the spellcasters must note what spell they intend to cast at the beginning of each round. It isn't just that things just happen willy-nilly. As the spellcaster player had to prep and begin casting a specific spell, and he needed to declare that particular one that he had planned on doing. Other intentions may be declared in a more general manner, right? Fire my bow or I attack with my sword, like it says on the document. Right? What was the other player's plan? And here's a good piece to it that I think modern gamers can pick up on. I think some of them are, when they put things like egg timers and down on the table for indecision. Any delay on the part of a player to declare intention should be considered as a like delay in the character's actions on a 6-second to 1 segment basis. If you hemmed and hawed about what you wanted to do for 30 seconds, half that round was gone. Right? The Dungeon Master should have moved on to what the other players were doing while you were indecisive. Having a plan and moving forward with it. Yeah, not to say things can't change in the dynamics of how the round works, but to keep things flowing, people needed to know what they wanted to do before things started. And if you hear the arguments that things bog down, it drags out and that's because we're allowing those delays just to take precedence as opposed to the action.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really just really it's just taking it to a sort of, it's taking the idea of, a player flipping through the spell book or whatever, the player's handbook or whatever other books they have, trying to determine what they're going to do and minimizing that, but taking it across all actions, and we basically used to just call for intentions. The round would start and it's like intentions, and then everybody would discuss what they wanted to do. A couple things that this brings up. Obviously, the DM's supposed to mentally take note of what the monsters do, and he probably shouldn't change that. Right, but there's been some. So first off, I think with the spellcasters noting what spell they intend to cast, that's because that spell can be interrupted and wiped from their memory. So that's why it's important for them to specifically state the spell. Now, they don't necessarily have to say, hey, I'm going to cast magic missile at the guy in the back. And then when the guy in the back is gone and their turn comes up, they lose the spell. But by starting, and people have different interpretations of this because it's not really directly laid out in the rules on when spell casting begins, and also when in the round that you're spell casting, you can be hit and lose the spell or not complete it. Same thing with the swords and stuff, because when we were younger, at least in the rule books, it tries to say, there's not a real strict guideline on what you have to say. And this document sort of boils that down and gives us the guideline. I don't have to say, for example, I mean, everybody's game is different, but let's just say I'm playing by this. I don't have to say, for example, I'm going to attack the goblin number 3, right? The goblin second over from the thief who's getting ready to flank him. And if that goblin's not there anymore, I can't do anything in the round because it doesn't match my intention. Generalization, except in the case of spellcasters, is generally pretty fine.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, that I've never played this way, but I have heard other players complain that their Dungeon Master makes them declare their action, and that's what they're doing for the entire round. So if the circumstances based on that action disappear, you did nothing that round. And I don't think that's fair for a dynamic 1 minute long something. If conditions change, you can adjust. But the problem with spellcasters is you had to remain in motion with your somatic components to cast that spell. If you decided, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, you lost that spell. And to
Yes.
your point where I think some of the intention, it seems to me, just reading the rules, that you jumped into action right off the beginning of the round. There were no delays or anything in there deciding I wanted to wait and do things like this. For the most part, you just galvanized into action. So the game master or the player, if he was casting a spell, would launch immediately into beginning the casting of the spell. And I don't think that was exactly the intention of the rule. I think it just seemed to come out that wasn't really explained. You know what I mean? That just
It
because
wasn't.
activity started at the beginning of the round doesn't mean that's exactly when you started waving your hands in the air. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I was going to mention that too, but I didn't know how deep you wanted to go into it. People have played differently with that
Oh,
particular
sure. It's your
aspect.
game. Play how you like. Yeah.
Yes, because it's implied, right? If you declare your spell and your spell can be lost, even if you're attacked before it's your turn, it's implied that all spell casting begins on segment 0, basically.
Right.
So a magic
Yeah.
missile, all first level spells for the most part, and 99% of them, right, would actually take effect on segment 1. So that's something. If you start on segment 0, that's something beneficial for low level magic users to be able to get their spell off, even if it's a simultaneous attack. On the other hand, some people say, okay, well, the spells start on your initiative die as determined by the dungeon master or whatever set of rules you're using. And then some people say, okay, your spells start on segment 1. I prefer to try to not include anything. So in my own games, all spells start on segment 0, regardless. So basically, right after intentions, right after initiative is rolled. But it really depends on the system under which you've decided to run initiative. And even Gary himself and a bunch of other people, old school guys on Dragon's Foot and whatnot, Gary did it both ways. Sometimes he would say, hey, spells begin on 0 and they can be interrupted and lost even if you haven't gone yet, or spells begin on 1, or the initiative result, and if you get attacked before that, then your spell isn't lost, just your action is lost. That's one of those areas that has some ambiguity.
Right. There's a great degree of interpretation that you can go in the way the rules were written. Dungeon Master D here suggestion was raw only. Well, that's one of the problems with the rules as written is sometimes they weren't exactly clear. Regardless of what Gary said, rules were, what did he say? They were clear and precise.
Simple and precise. Yeah.
Well, no, not exactly. They weren't always that way, right? You had to go digging through to find pieces of them together. And that was, like we mentioned earlier on, that's the benefit. The beauty of this document was you try to compile all of those sources from the different pages they were and put them in a more organized format, right? Even this right here, he would have said specifically that everything begins on the beginning of the round. It doesn't seem that way reading this document. Yeah. You had flexibility on your interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. And he ran this by the community way back on Dragon's Foot and elsewhere. And this was a work in progress, and this was what most people agreed on as being raw. Because with the DMG or something, you may as well be reading the Necronomicon. This is an easier way to read it, and it also, the things that they leave out shows the DM and the players the areas of potential interpretation.
Yeah, we got a point here from Dungeon Master D again. That's why I enjoyed the cleanup we saw on the rise of second edition. But one of the things about second edition is that wasn't Gary's cleanup. It was somebody else's cleanup on the release of second edition.
Yeah, Dave Cook mostly.
Right.
Zeb. The problem that I have with it Yeah. The problem that I have with it is a lot of the character was missed. But I'll be perfectly honest with you. I was super excited. In what 1988, 1989, when the second edition came out, and I bought all those books and I devoured them as like a 15-year-old or whatever. And I loved them, and we played for a long time under
I
second
bought
edition.
the only ones I'd had were the first three of the first edition books, and didn't pick up another Dungeons and Dragons book until third edition. So
Oh yeah.
I kind of skipped and bypassed second edition. Well, mostly because I was a little busy with my time in service.
You're right. And I was basically a loser. So, I had nothing to do but read, and
I hear
and the
you.
old gaming group, the people that went
Well,
from AD&D to 2E,
mhm.
we stayed the same group. And in
Oh
fact,
yeah, and there's some people
Dungeon
that
Master D
absolutely
was
love
one of them.
second edition because, again, like you mentioned, some of the just the clarifications made things easier for somebody else to understand. Somebody had a rewrite of those rules and made tweak some, and that's fine. It's I think
Right.
even I'm trying to remember what page it is. Even Gary Gygax in his book says you just do what you want. Here's some guidelines to follow, but make it your own. Yeah.
Right.
Let's
Right.
see. Pre-initiative actions are resolved. Right. So these are things that happen before action starts. A bow specialist who begins they know no definition of what a bow specialist is, right? Who begins the round with an arrow nock shaft drawn. A target in sight is entitled to loose that arrow prior to that initiative check, right? So if you're walking through the dungeon, somebody flung open the door, and you're standing there with your arrow drawn, and just what was in the room, you had the option of loosen that arrow before anything takes place.
Right. And I think when they say bow specialist, they're talking about the weapon specialization rules in Unearthed Arcana.
Well, page 52, official advanced under, yeah, on Earth Arcana, exactly right. That's where he pulled that from. Yeah, from the
Right. That was one of the
the
things that they added for archers, but
aha. So in pure first edition pre-unearthed Arcana, there is no. You would have to read that and go, ugh. Nobody is a specialist, right? A crossbow specialist who begins a round with a crossbow cocked and aimed and target range also gets a free shot before initiative is rolled. In some ways, I could. It makes a lot of sense. If you are prepared when you crack open that door and stuff starts flying, you should have, for lack of a better word, the jump on your opponent at that point in time, regardless of what
right.
surprise or anything said. Yeah. Any other exceptional actions that occur part of the initiative should be resolved here. So the game master or dungeon master, for the case of this game, um, had the option of you know adjudicating. Hey, yeah, that's a special case. You get to go ahead and do that. Yeah.
Hmm.
All right. So that would mean I would kick this one over, and since I can't read it, I'll roll over here. Resolve psionic comp. Okay, we'll forget about that one. Psionic combat
Right.
on a
And
segment by
it's
segment basis. There's not a lot of games that I am aware of um, that use psionics. Now, I like them. It's hard to get a hold of. I think it's a neat addition to it, but some people find it just it's too difficult. So that's just it is an option. So they drop the option, but they account for it in um, in this document. 57 is Dungeon Master's Guide, 76 to 78, right? Where
right. And I apologize for just taking a step back because I was chatting to people or whatever, but that whole crossbow specialist thing, and I know it's kind of interrupting, but it's important to say the crossbow specialist who begins the round with crossbow cocked and aim, target and range. That particular footnote that comes from Mordenkainen's Fantastic Adventure. So it comes from a module, right? So this includes, and I don't think we've had the opportunity to talk about that yet, but this includes things that were official modules by
right,
Gygax and or coons, and things like that would happen. Even back in the day with BX, B2, B2 would have rules in it that were
Yep.
just part of the module, and a bunch of the modules had rules that were just part of the module. So when you're talking about raw, you also have to talk about what's inclusive and what's not in your particular game. Anyway, sorry.
No, exactly. And now that you bring that up, I'm going to rope you into another discussion of all the rules changes over the years that came into things like modules and stuff like that, and clarifications that happened because of the modules coming out, and the writers, the founders of the game, changing their minds on the way things were supposed to work or clarifying things like that. Exactly, the rules that official changes were the modules that came out. Some of them came out in Dragon Magazine, and that would be another excellent stream that we could do on how it
Yeah, I agree.
changed a little bit over the years. Yeah, well, here we go. Most psionic combat happens before first round of non-psionic combat. Well, you would think, yeah, it's coming out of your head, so it should go a little faster than actually swinging your arm. The speed of electrons from your brain down to your wrist is, but we don't have to drill down to that level of detail. It's like psionics, as I can recall, was included largely because of the Mind Flayer. So they added it to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So we can thank the guy that invented the Mind Flayer for psionics. Compare each psionic's chosen attack mode and his opponent's chosen defense mode. All attacks and defenses are simultaneous for psionics. So there really is no it's just basically a tied initiative for the psionics. Each attack and defense strength totals reflect the segment's expenditures as well as any points lost due to attack. Repeat steps A and B until the psionic combat has ended. One or both psionics are affected by a more mundane attack form during a round, or 10 segments have passed. Right? So baking in the psionics and how that worked in the combat round was right here on this section.
Right, and they've got a lot of information, obviously, in the DMG and stuff like that. But again, the monster manual came out first, and of course, things like Mind Flayers and stuff came from OD&D, and then psionics was also added in OD&D, and then translated almost, I think, as an afterthought into AD&D. And I know that I've read many times that Gygax himself regretted their inclusion. But there's lots of things that he regretted the inclusion of, such as weapons versus armor type and stuff like that, that I still find fascinating. Now, in 2E, they embraced psionics full bore, with a complete psionicist handbook and all of this stuff. And it did a lot to make it better. So I would say if you're using psionics, they're fascinating. You're going to have to kind of figure out how that fits within the flow of your game. And if you're not using them, you just basically create a special ability for like Psionic Blast or something like that for Mind Flayer that mirrors kind of Psionic Blast upon non-psionicists, and the DMG lays that out, because there's a separate table.
We mentioned last time, it's an excellent collection of gaming advice. Yeah. All right. So now here, actually, we're going to get into the meat of things. Pun intended there. Determine initiative round by rolling a d6 for each side. The higher the two rolls is said to possess the initiative for the melee round. Mostly, from what I've read, that was largely just to decide you can't be talking over each other on the table. Who do we resolve first? Yeah. Each participant does not make a separate initiative roll. Yeah, first edition Dungeons & Dragons was group initiative. Each side, the die roll was per side. So everything went off all together on your side. However, dexterity attacking adjustment is added to or subtracted from the initiative roll for each missile firing combatant on an individual basis. So if you were particularly fast and you were going to go ahead and shoot your bow, even though your side may have rolled a 3, your bow shot would go off on the adjustment. And it was a descending
Exactly.
D6 down. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so I think the reaction attacking adjustment, since they combined them together, if I'm not mistaken, it was a plus, but it would actually be a minus in the case, so
Of the initiative.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes that happened, but I think it was intuitive enough that people could grasp that. The big takeaway here is that because 2E did things a little bit different, the big takeaway here is that dexterity adjustment, or the reaction adjustment of dexterity, only applies, right, if you're using missile fire.
Right.
Now it's commonly house ruled that it always applies, but that's much more valuable in 2E, where you might roll a d10, add your weapon speed, and then subtract your dexterity, which could make somebody wielding a two-handed sword with a +4 dex capable of going under,
Sure.
under like 15, right? But in standard AD&D, I think
But, yeah,
it makes sense.
here's your caveat to that, though. Initiative bonuses do not apply to characters carrying more than light gear. The 12-inch base movement. If you were laden down with armor, things like this, that did not apply. However, initiative
Right, and I think we
penalties
talked about
always
that
apply.
last time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
which makes sense. Right.
Sure.
And I think
Sure.
we talked about that last time, is that encumbrance table in the PHB, whatever it was, 102, 103. It's a little bit confusing, but basically you match this up to unencumbered, and if you're unencumbered, then your dexterity reaction adjustment, if it's a bonus, will apply if you're using a missile weapon.
Mhm.
If you're beyond unencumbered, then if you have a penalty, that's happening.
Sure. One exceptional monster, the Spectator, which came out in the Monster Manual 2, rolls a D8 for initiative rather than a D6. So there's where things started going a little wonky, right? Party
Right.
rolls a D6, so the Spectator, which could go easily 2 segments before the party got a chance to go based on the D8 roll, right? And
Yeah, yeah, and it's worth mentioning. I think, like if we look at the little footnote there, it's kind of hard to see, but I'm looking at it on another screen too. That's number 67, right? And of course, that's Leonard Lakofka, in The Secret of Bone Hill is where he introduced that.
right.
And anybody who knows anything about Len Lakofka, and we might get into that at some point here, is that he was one of the proponents of complexifying. I know that's probably not a word, right? But complexifying initiative, things like individual initiative, things like dexterity affecting
Well,
different things like multiple actions, and he just brought it into his module. And then of course
he's
it
very
ended up
proud of
in
that.
MM2. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, if depending on how much time we run into tonight, we may actually get in a look at his articles in the Dragon magazine too. Those are excellent
right on.
articles when you get into the mind of some of the guys that were originally involved in all this to begin with.
Yes.
Certain magic items, notably the crossbow of speed, short sword of quickness, and scimitar of speed, allow the wielder to strike first regardless of the initiative result. So, highly sought after items. If you were doing combat based on initiative timing and when things went off in the round. If you were kind of hand waving these kind of rules, then those weapons didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right, right. And again, one of the challenges is that the information regarding that is really just buried in a text block in the DMG. So if the DM didn't know that stuff or didn't look at it, then he might not know that. And of course, the player, if he's playing according to the way he's supposed to play, not owning a copy of the DMG and whatnot, or not referencing it at least, You might not know that. That's why, it's always a good idea when you come across a spell or a new item or whatever, bring it out in front of the table and see how it's going to impact your game.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll kick it over to the next page. Generally, the results of whatever actions are decided upon by the party with initiative are determined first, followed by the results of whatever actions are decided upon by the party which lost the initiative. Ties usually indicate that attacks occur simultaneously. Special cases are listed below. In certain ways, I kind of like the ideas of things that are all going off together as opposed to sequentially. Because you would all, if you're in magic user's got the jump on you, you may not ever survive that fight because they can whip out some damage pretty quickly, especially if you've got a big disparity between initiative rolls. Multiple attack routines. Right. When one or more creatures involved in a combat are permitted to use their attack routines twice or more often during the round, then the following initiative determinants are employed. Here's where we get into timing things in the round. When the attack routine may be used twice, then allow the side with the advantage to attack first and last with those members of its group who have this advantage. So, if you get to do claw bite twice in a round, or whatever your attack routine is, you go first, party goes, then you go last. Yeah. If it is possessed by both parties, so here we get into like fighters with multiple swings. It is possessed by both parties. The initiative roll determines which group strikes first and third, and which group strikes second and last. Right, so if you're facing off with somebody, both sides, each of them get 2 attacks around, the initiative decides who gets to go first and third, and who gets to go second and last on that one. Going first is always a good idea when things happen at the beginning of the round and start rolling from there.
Yeah, and in one way, it occurs to me, that one way you can look at the attack routines, which it's mentioned lower below in this document, right. Kind of think of it as a guy with a missile weapon that fires twice in a round, say a short bow or a long bow or something.
Yep.
Generally speaking, they're going to go first and last in the round, and you can apply that same kind of idea to multiple attack routines. Right.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing, even though with the bow, 2 shots is 1 attack routine. But yeah.
Sure, but if you're going to determine the timing on them, they didn't go off at the same time. Clearly, I mean that's we talked about this last week with Hawk the Slayer.
yeah, exactly. So it's really just an extension, in my opinion, of multiple missile shots in a combat round.
Right. If one or both groups have members allowed only 1 attack routine, it will always fall in the middle of the other attacks, the order determined by dicing for initiative when necessary. Right. Being fast and having multiple routines, yeah, you get to go first, but that also means when everything's said and done, you can do a follow-up.
Yeah. Right, and you would dice for it only if it's not determinable. Like both groups have it, and it's not determinable which, say fighter swings first. But if it's based on which fighter swings first, you have separate rules based on weapon speed for that. But say a fighter and a chimera or something like that, middle of the round, you might have to dice for if it's not clearly, if it's not clearly obvious.
And here's where we're starting to go super detailed. If one party has the ability to employ its attack routines thrice, 3 times, then the other party dices for initiative to see if it or the multi-routine group strikes first in the midpoint of the round. So it sounds, if you can do extra, getting the jump is super beneficial because you might be able to get in multiple attacks before the other group gets a chance to do their plan, their response. And here we go more. Extrapolate for routines which occur 4 or more times in a round by following the method above. So, okay, well, there's your 7-headed Hydra. I mean, that,
Right, right, and of course, you know, extrapolating the method above is crystal clear, since the method above is crystal clear, right? You know, it takes some
yeah,
work to get this stuff down, you know, it really does, but it's worth it.
sure. Note that a routine is the attack or attacks usual to the creature concerned, i.e., a weapon or weapons for a character, a claw bite routine for a bear, with incidental damage assessed as it occurs, the hug, for example. A 12th level fighter is allowed to attack routines twice in every odd numbered melee round, for example, and this moves up to 3 per round if a haste spell is cast upon the fighter. Right. But he may die of old age in the middle of that fight if we haste him. But,
Yeah, yeah. And the thing that's important here, you know, most monsters are going to have a single attack routine unless some circumstance changes it. But for characters, they say weapon or weapons because if I'm dual wielding, you know, say a short sword and a dagger, that's an attack routine. And if I get two of those attack routines in a round, or two attacks in a round because of something like haste, it's those two attack routines. If I'm a fighter and I have a bastard sword and a shield, my attack routine is the bastard sword. If I'm a fighter with no shield, short sword and dagger, my attack routine is both the short sword and the dagger.
yeah. And on the face of it, if you're not really familiar with how this stuff works, that sounds like it's a fantastic advantage that I get actually can poke at some guy twice. But one of the things about your, if you're attacking with 2 weapons, you've got penalties to your to hit roll for each weapon, coordinating them. Now, reading the rules, that's mitigated some. If you're going to use 2 weapons, you want to be fast because your reaction adjustment actually helps mitigate the penalty for your to hit rolls. But we can drill down into those
Absolutely.
weeds later when we actually get into uh, exchanging blows. This rule
Right.
applies to missile attacks as well as to multiple melee attacks. Thus, a longbow rate of fire 2 will generally fire first and last in the round. There we go. Like we just said a minute ago, bam, here it is on bullet point number 5 there. A charge. Normal melee is not possible when opponents begin the round over 1 inch distant or 10 feet away. A round must be spent closing. Now, taking an entire minute to move 15 feet seems a little extreme. But alternatively, the attacker may choose to charge. This action brings the charging party into combat on the charge round, provided the movement rate plus bonus allows this. So basically, a charge round is not really part of the melee. That is, it's outside of it. It's ahead of it. Yeah.
Right. Right.
And
And
they list here the movement
I
rates too. Go ahead.
You right, right. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, and I'll try not to take too long on this, but the basic
That's
idea
what we're here to
is
talk
that
about. Go for it.
yeah, well, the basic idea is that you can either close into, say you're not engaged in combat, and engaged in combat, for my own terminology, I like to call it a combat engagement zone, so that everybody knows what it is. It's when two opponents are within 10 feet of each other. So in order to enter that, because we didn't have attacks of opportunity and stuff like that as
No.
such, so in order to enter that combat engagement zone, you can run in there with a charge, provided you have the capability of doing so, or you can close into there, defending yourself carefully and all that, so that nobody's afforded an attack. And initiative starts once both combatants are engaged, and it's basically assumed that any movement or anything like that within that 10-foot square just kind of happens. If you're using, you know, battle mat, any sort of grid and miniatures and stuff, it's pretty fair to assume that as long as both opponents stay within that same 10-foot square that they've established as the combat engagement zone, they can kind of move around in there. So shift a square left, shift a square right, you know, and that
Right.
sort of thing. But
As long as you haven't
that
moved
would be
outside the
one of
ring.
the reasons.
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be the only reason that I could see that closing into combat wouldn't be considered extreme, because you're trying to trying to get in a position to where, you know, each opponent is trying to get in a, think of a couple of guys, you know, in a movie or some sort of cinematic thing, and those guys come together and they do their sword play and stuff, feints and jabs and shields and this kind of thing to try to get into position to where there's actually a chance for an attack. But yeah, it does definitely seem extreme.
Right. So mandatory then should be when you close, say, on guard.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Outdoors, charging bipeds receive a 1/3 movement bonus. So a fighter basically charging adds extra move to him. He can run a little bit. Basically, he's running, right, instead of a tactical move. Charging quadrupeds, well, maybe that would be a horse, get a half movement bonus. So charging somebody down with a lance attack, right? Indoors movement rate for all charging creatures is doubled. Because outdoors everything was yards, indoors it's feet. Encumbered
Right.
creatures may not charge. Well, yeah, if you're being dragged down by the weight of your gear, you're not running.
Yes, and it's probably worth mentioning there that since we've already determined that unencumbered means movement rate of 12,
Yes.
that encumbered means something beyond that. So it could be interpreted that you're not charging in plate mail armor unless that armor is magical or whatever,
Or
right?
something. Right.
Or unless you're upon a horse that's capable of carrying being unencumbered while you're on it. But
Mhm.
people don't really pay attention to that too much, and it's
No.
because encumbrance hasn't really been properly defined in a structured manner. Um, you know, because charging implies fast movement. You know,
Yeah. Totally different story if you wanted to run into the combat and try overbearing or something like that. There's special rules for that.
yes, yes, and they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. Armor class of charging creatures. There is no dexterity bonus allowed for charging creatures. How are you dodging when you're just flat out running into the fight, right? Creatures with no dexterity bonus become one
Right.
armor class worse. There is no penalty to AC 10 creatures for charging, however. It doesn't, well, there isn't anything. There is no AC 11, right?
Right.
At end of charge, melee at end of charge. Initiative is not checked at the end of charge movement. Here's another idea that goes a little outside the timing rules. Opponent with the longer weapon reach attacks first. You're charging into a fight. Your opponent, who's got some reach on you, has the opportunity to try and fend that off. You know, setting a spear against a charge or something like that. Charging creatures gain +2 on their 2 hit dice if they survive any opponent attacks which occur first. Right, if I make it through your spear, it's going to be easier for me to
Precisely.
land a telling blow. It is pretty
Right.
important to
Right.
note that your 2 hit roll isn't necessarily that is your one quote unquote swing for the round. Your 2 hit is the opportunity to land a telling blow. Lots of blows happen in the fight that don't do anything.
Yeah, yeah, and you can go back to the cinematic example of a charge, you know, because a lot of this was based on war games, like we talked about. But the
Mm-hmm.
cinematic, look at say Braveheart or something. Those guys charge across the field, slam into each other, or say you like to go to metal concerts and get in the pit, you slam into each other. You might be standing
Yeah.
right in front of the guy when you're done, or you might be 5 feet over that way, so there's not and having to make it through the spears or the boots or whatever it is, is just part of the charge. And the other thing, I don't think the language is real clear here, but it comes directly from the Dungeon Master's Guide that initiative is not checked at the end of charge movement, but it's assumed that initiative has already been rolled and you start your charge on your initiative roll or whatever. And initiative is not the determining factor of who attacks first. Rather, it's weapon length, right? And some people get caught up on that and think that charge goes before initiative because it says that initiative is not checked. But that's not the intent of it. The intent of it is the initiative doesn't matter when it comes to determining who attacks first in a charge engagement.
You flat out running against each other instead of dancing around and trying to gain an advantage position, right? Yeah. No charging into the pit for me anymore. I'm too old. I'll break a hit.
I would too, probably.
Here's where this comes into play when you mentioned initiative. Yeah, initiative is checked because to determine the timing of a charge attack versus an opposing spellcaster, compare the segments of movement required to the casting time of the spell. How much do you have to close based on how long it's going to take him to loose his spell? Right there, it matters. It matters. There's no way your movement rate might be 12, but there's no way you're going to close 120 feet in the time it takes me to finish off my 6-second spell. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Spellcasting. When a spellcaster has won the initiative, it is possible for an opponent's attack to occur before the completion of and thus disrupt the spell. This is pretty important. Yeah. If combat is spell versus spell, the spell with the shorter casting time will be completed first, with the initiative result breaking ties in casting times. So if you tied initiative, both sides roll a 3, and you're both whipping out a 3-segment spell, if you won initiative, yours actually goes off before the opponents go off, even though you're tied. So basically, you could assume initiative result breaking ties in casting times. So this would come into play where you've got disparate casting times, but your initiative roll allowed you a little bit of a jump on it. Yeah.
Right. So say, for example, one guy rolls an initiative of 1 and he casts his spell with a 2-segment time, which gives him, say, a 3. And then the other guy rolls a 2 and casts his spell with a casting time of 1, which also gives him a 3. That 2-segment spell would take effect before the 1-segment spell because it's based on the initiative result.
Time. Yeah. If the spellcaster is being attacked by a melee weapon with a speed factor rating, now here's where speed factor comes in. This is one of the reasons why I like speed factor.
Me too.
Most games didn't use it because they didn't really understand the usefulness of it. Use the following procedure to determine when the weapon strikes. A, when the attacker wins initiative, the weapon will always strike spot prior to spell completion. This is why having a dagger is extremely useful. When the initiative is tied, a straight comparison of weapon speed factor to spell casting time will determine which occurs first. Simultaneous results are possible. You can stab him at the same time that he fries your face with a magic missile. When the attacker loses initiative, subtract the attacker's losing initiative die from the weapon speed factor, treating negative numbers as positive, and compare the result to the spell casting time to determine which occurs first. Again, simultaneous results are possible, right? Speed factors. Fast weapons can really make the difference in a fight. Even though they may not do a lot of damage, the ability to get that shot in first against an enemy spellcaster can be critically important.
Yeah, and I think that adds to the game. Maybe it adds a little bit of complexity, but once you have these routines down, it can change the combat in ways that are much more dynamic than something you'll get out of say OD&D or BX or AD&D, the way a lot of guys run it, where speed factors are just not considered. And we've all done that at times, but you know, speed factors are critically important if you use them.
Yeah, and we'll address this point right here. It makes the weapon proficiencies really make a difference. Not exactly the proficiencies, because proficiencies just to determine your to hit roll. If you're not proficient with a weapon, I think what he might mean is
Choice.
Choice, specialty. Well, if you're using the unearthed arcana and you go back into weapon specialization, you gain bonuses with weapon specialization. Yeah.
And
weapon choice go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It might be he might mean that, like, because what's the point of a fighter having 4 weapon proficiencies versus say a cleric having 3, right, at first level? Why? Right. I think that's
here we go.
what he was
That's
getting
exactly
at.
what it is. You've got 5% you can choose a better weapon for the situation. Exactly. Weapon.
Yeah.
Using some of these rules that everybody thought, well, it's just optional, I don't understand it, makes weapon choice matter. You really need to think through the weapons you're picking. Oh no, I'm just going to grab 2-handed weapon because it does a whole lot of damage every round, but we're not really using. Okay, then it doesn't matter, right? Why would
Right.
anybody grab a dagger if it didn't make any difference? It just doesn't do any damage.
Everyone would use 2-handed swords. You know, every fighter would. I mean, unless he wanted to have a shield, in which case it'd be bastard sword shield. You know,
But still, it doesn't make any difference. Yeah. If the spellcaster is being attacked by missile weapons or by natural weaponry without a speed factor rating, such as a monster's claw, bite, use the following procedure to determine when the attack strikes. Right, when the attacker wins initiative, the attack will always strike prior to spell completion. Yeah, natural attacks are always going to be faster than weapon attacks. When the attacker loses the initiative or when the initiative is tied, the attack will occur on the segment indicated by the caster's initiative die. Compare this to the spell casting time to determine which occurs first. Simultaneous results are possible. Yeah. The example here really lays this out. The duel comes to a grinding halt when an out-of-control air elemental turns on Bigby. It starts to attack while Bigby tries to cast protection from evil 10-foot radius, 3 segments, to keep it away from him. Bigby wins initiative 4-1, so the elemental's attack will come on segment 4 after the spell is completed. Bigby is safe for the moment. Yeah. That's a good example right there that lays that out perfectly. Yeah,
it does, but it also seems to indicate, this is what I was getting at earlier, is that does the spell begin and complete, if it's a 1 segment spell, for example, on segment 0 or segment 1 on the initiative die, right? Because let's look at this example. For example, so Bigby rolls a 4, the elemental rolls a 1, so the elemental's attack comes on segment 4 after the spell is completed, right? So that would imply that Bigby, with his roll of, well, I guess Bigby got a 1, right? So wins initiative 4-1. But anyway, that's unimportant, but it's a topic for another conversation. I don't know what they mean by Bigby wins initiative 4-1. Specifically,
remember, your
in this
initiative
case
was descending.
Yeah, right. Whoever's lower, right? So he
Right.
wins initiative 1-4.
No. It's descending. So the 4 would be the higher roll on the initiative roll. That wins the initiative. His 3-segment spell would go off on 3-1. But since the elemental's attack routine goes on a 1, what's the timing on that? Well, since the elemental lost, the spell goes off before the elemental's attack routine takes place.
Right. I'm going to table that in my brain.
Yeah. Because we get so used to different initiative systems. We got to remember that with initiative system here, the high numbers go first. You're descending in your order of it, which
Right,
logically your
right.
brain always goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as opposed to backwards. Yeah. Cantrips. Well, there wasn't any cantrips in first edition until Unearthed Arcana. So right. When attacker has multiple attack routines, the first attack has an opportunity to disrupt the spell unless the spell requires a full round to cast. Yeah. Magic user may cast 2 cantrips in a single round because they're supposed to be fast and they're supposed to be light magic and stuff, so you can kick them off in a single round. In such a case, timing of the first cantrip is determined as above, which would be the example there with Bigby. The second cantrip will be cast 1 to 4 segments later. So sometime in the middle of the round, you'll be able to whip out a second cantrip. The one thing about cantrips that I've noticed, because I kind of like them a little bit, they really don't have a whole lot of power behind them, right? Most of them are utility as opposed to offensive.
Yeah, and it gives
So
the magic user something to do, because if you've got one spell and you
yeah.
blow a magic missile and you can do nothing else, cantrips are a nice sort of insertion.
Mm-hmm. Spellcaster cannot use his or her dexterity bonus to avoid being hit during spell casting. Doing so interrupts the spell. This is critically important. A magic user standing there, a lot of magic users depend on their dexterity for defense. But while you're casting your spell, here, well, wait a minute, let's kick off here. Are you suggesting that if you subtract the roll from 10 segments to get where the initiative starts? Not exactly. Even though you roll a 6, you're starting on segment 1 for everything. So there could very well be, based on this question that we posted up here, there could very well be almost half the round left at the end of all the initiative dice. Yeah. When you're counting down and moving through things. Your initiative dice, you basically compare the two. The faster gets to go on their die, and then the losers kind of picks up in part of the segment of the round. Yeah. Let's see what we got here. Go back to our dexterity bonus, right? Remember, when you're casting spells, you have to, the book even says they have to be precise. They have to follow the prescribed order and all this. You can't be trying to dodge sword blows at the same time you're doing your rain dance to call lightning on somebody. You cannot use your dexterity bonus to defense. All you have as a magic user is any magic that you got and your armor to protect you, which for magic users, since they can't wear armor, would be their clothes.
Yeah, and I think this is sort of the inspiration of the idea of like a concentration check. This older system didn't use those types of checks and skills and all that kind of thing. But I think it informed later editions of the rules, like a concentration check. Okay, the guy's attacking you, make a concentration check, otherwise your spell is spoiled.
Any successful attack or non-saved against attack upon the spellcaster interrupts the spell. A successful attack does damage. Non-saved attack means some sort of area of effect went off and you didn't save against the damage. Taking the damage is what interrupts your spell. If you take a whack or if somebody tries to wave their sword at you as a magic user and does not hit you, that act does not interrupt your spell. It's taking the damage that interrupts your spell.
Right.
The above procedures for resolving the timing of attacks against spellcasters also apply to opponents using magical devices with specific activation times, such as rods, staves, and wands. These functions, however, will not be automatically disrupted by a successful attack unless the wielder is slain or otherwise incapacitated. Yeah, I'd looked a lot of those things up, make sure I had that stuff in my mind, and I'm old and I can't remember everything all the time.
Right.
Where are they at? I know I wrote them things down. Activation times. Potions activate within 1d4 plus 1 rounds. Staves, 2 segments to activate it. Wands, 1 or 2. So you're trying to kick off something with your staff, and it's going to be like casting a 2-segment spell. If you are hit and take 0 damage because of other factors would still interrupt your spell, but that's probably a ruling, not a rule. And I can kind of agree with this. You were still struck. This
Me too.
attack was still successful, even though you may not have taken any damage. You could
Right. If
argue
I
that,
can't use my dexterity, right. If I can't use my dexterity, that means I can't do anything except stand there, wave my arms. There's no concentration check. Because my concentration is completely focused on the task
yes,
at hand. Even
that is
even going
exactly.
up and let's say the thief thinks he's funny or something. Let's say he's a kender or something, and he goes up and shoves the magic user and gets a laugh out of it while he's casting a spell. Right? It doesn't hurt the magic user, but the magic user might end up hurting the kender.
Because it would disrupt the spell, right?
Right.
Yeah, you're committed to doing all the motions that are required to cast that spell. So the only protection you have as a wizard is the protection of the equipment you're wearing and any magic items you're carrying, like bracers of armor or defense or something like this. Which is why
Right.
before you wade into a fight, you cast mirror image. So
Yeah.
we're kicking this over to another. Here's where we get into weapon speed factors. All right. D, when weapon speed factor. Wow, we've been running over an hour on this already. Wow, this is good. A lot of
It
talking about it here.
flies.
This is a little longer than I had expected. When initiative is tied, weapon speed factors are used to determine who strikes the first blow. Otherwise, it just goes in initiative orders. But if you're tied, who has the faster weapon? Which kind of makes some sense.
This is a huge reason. Without going into all the examples. Yeah, that's a good point, Cooler. This is a huge reason that games that don't use weapon speed factor are a lot less interesting to me than games that do. I mean, we've talked about weapon speed factor and how it applies against spell casting and those kinds of things, but uh, you know, this is one of the things that actually makes AD&D fantastically interesting to me, as far as the different properties of different weapons.
Yeah. But from the sake of the argument, without weapon speed factor, the two-handed swordsman is probably going to clean house on the guy with a dagger.
Right.
But and we'll see when we talk about some of this as it moves through how that makes a difference. The opponent with a weapon which has the lower speed factor will strike first, subject to the following conditions. The initiative roll must be tied. Your hits are going at the same time, kind of thing. Both combatants must be using melee weapons with speed factors. So missile weapons out the window. Right? Both combatants must have an
Natural
odd or
attacks
even
out the
number of
window.
attacks in the round. Right? So you basically one swing each, or 3 every 2 or something, but both of you the same. So you're the equivalent, basically, power levels amongst one another. What's determining what's happened is the weapon you're carrying. When weapon speed factor is a determinant of which opponent strikes first in a melee round, there is a chance that one opponent will be entitled to multiple attacks. Bam, here's where having a dagger going against that guy with a two-handed sword is possibly to your advantage. Compare the score of the lower factor weapon with that of the higher. If the difference is at least twice the factor of the lower, a dagger is a lot more than a two-handed sword, 5 or more factors in any case, the opponent with a lower factored weapon is entitled to 2 attacks before the opponent with the higher weapon factor is entitled to get any attack whatsoever. So you're coming at me with your two-handed sword, I'm coming at you with a dagger. The chances are I could get 2 strikes on you. 2 chances at 1d4 damage before your swing even gets a chance to land. If the difference is
Yes,
10 or greater, 10 or greater. The opponent with a lower factored weapon is entitled to 2 attacks before the dagger against pole-arm. Before the higher weapon factor is allowed to attack, and 1 further attack at the same time the opponent with a higher speed factor's weapon is allowed to attack. I'm coming at you with a dagger and we tie. I could possibly stab you twice, and then a third time at the same time you hit me. I mean, there's a lot right there.
And it's so imaginative too. You know,
Yeah.
this is one of the areas where the rule, like I can envision that in my mind's eye, how that might look. And that's something that makes AD&D fascinating, because it's abstracted and not necessarily codified, but you can sort of envision how something, and a pike or spear versus a dagger or whatever is a perfect example. And I love this rule. And without weapon speed factor, I don't envision that, because there's nothing to imagine.
It's not there. It's not there. This
Right.
This rule is pointless without weapon speed factor. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Note that such speed factor considerations are not applicable when either closing or charging to melee, but after an initial round of combat, or in cases where closing charging was not necessary. The speed factor considerations are applicable. Right. When you're charging, what makes the difference is weapon length, which of course longer weapons are going to be slower, but you set them against the charge that's closing.
And when you're closing, nobody gets to make an attack. That's why closing takes so long, is because the attacker is defending himself against his opponent's attacks to ensure. So closing basically ensures that you won't be attacked entering that combat engagement zone, right?
Sure. You're coming in prepared, trying to find your advantage and things like this, and that takes a little bit of time to sort things out and move into the combat, right?
Right.
And that was it as far as all the explanations go. There is an example of melee that goes on for another 10 pages. But we went through the gist of the rules and stuff here. It's on ADDICT. Now, we've been going a little longer than an hour, a little longer than I had expected us to go through, because there wasn't that much left in the document, but there was plenty of solid stuff in it. So we'll take a couple of minutes, though, and and you and I discussed this before, we'll cover back in original Dungeons and Dragons, they were forming these ideas because they didn't have casting times and stuff like this. So they were forming these ideas. And in the Eldritch Wizardry supplement is where they started doing additions to the alternate combat system. A lot of this was spelled out in chainmail, right? And don't let anybody tell you, well, chainmail was never intended for. That's exactly what it was. It wasn't. Chainmail was the fighting system for this, and the alternative combat system was the add-on. Well, not everybody has chainmail. Okay, let's create something to help people who just have these books for rules. Yeah. And the explanation in here was great. The question of when various actions take place during a melee round often arises. Here is your progenitor of the initiative sequence going.
Right.
In order to simplify and easily satisfy the problem of when any action can take place in the melee round has been further subdivided into pre-movement, movement in 6 segments, and then post-movement, or 8 parts in all. So even though your round is 10 segment, here we go with only 8. And the dexterity is what played into where things happen in this. After the first melee round of the pattern of missile fire spellcasting should be readjusted. So this didn't apply to the first round of combat. This was subsequent rounds thereafter when you're jockeying. You're doing your jockeying for position and stuff. The factors added in is on the next page. Basically, here's the table. How do we calculate the? Well, here's how we calculate the things on the table. If surprise, lose the first segment of a die roll of 1 and second segment's on a die roll of 2. Here's where being surprised or complete surprised, bam. Here's where it kind of surfaces, right? If you're completely surprised, you lose 2 segments. You lose two options off of that. Adjustment to dexterity, right? Complete supplies +4. remember when you're doing your um, pluses or minuses, it's counter to what you would think. Um, Elf got a +1 bonus. Great, fantastic. Maybe I might want to play an elf because I can surprise a little more often. You would think halfling would be on there based on their nature, but weapon ready. Here's a big one. With a weapon ready, you had
Right.
+3 to that table that we just went past, right? And then you go into your penalties. Plate armor, bam. Here's where the equipment you're wearing starts to show up as being slowing you down.
Yeah, which actually gets translated into AD&D by not being able to take your reaction attacking adjustment if you're encumbered. Rather than taking a minus to your initiative for wearing plate mail, you just don't
Mm-hmm.
get the reaction attacking adjustment if it's a positive or a net positive if you're
Right.
wearing that plate mail, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
here's where the first parts of the rules go, and as they played through them and shaking them out and figuring out what works, okay, we'll make some adjustments, and it changed. Since you didn't have
right,
casting times, though, when did these powerful spells go off? So they included that in this chart so that you could
right.
compare this. How many of those segments of action did it take for, your, which is fifth level spell? No, fireball. Everybody likes fireball. We'll go that third level, right? -2. So we roll back up to that table a little bit and drop 2 off to these numbers, and you could see where, if you started out with a 0, but you were going to cast your spell, -2 would kick you down a notch, right? So instead of going on a 3, it would go on a 4. So
Right,
there's
right.
where
And it's real
your
interesting.
early examples of casting times come into play right here. This was a
Yeah.
nice little tread backwards into what were they thinking? Where did this other stuff come out? They came in out in AD&D, and here right here.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because the second level spells, no, I mean all the spells here and the penalty, you can see that transcribed into the initiative system in AD&D because most second level spells would be 2 segments, most first level spells would be 1 segment, most third level spells like a fireball would be 3 segments. Of course, there's exceptions, but if you just take all these numbers and shift them by 1, then you actually get sort of the casting time of a spell. There's a lot of that in here. As a matter of fact, they talk about ready. AD&D talks about readied weapons and being able to attack multiple
Yep,
times in
yep,
a
yep, yep.
surprise segment. You get the complete surprise concept of it says it right here. Complete surprise is basically a die of 2 pips. It's fascinating stuff looking at how this progressed and sort of morphed into the de facto tournament edition of D&D.
Yeah. And we mentioned earlier, and we'll kick it out here real quick. Len Lakovka, right? Let's see. Remove that one. Kick this one out. There we go. Dragon Magazine number 34. Here's the first one. And light up at the top of the screen, it says, I have designed many complex melee combat systems that have included such items as hit location and even special damage. These systems have met with good reception by players who have found them realistic, exciting, and time consuming. Yeah. Yes, the more detail you add to it, the
Right.
drag on. Alas, the time taken when a figure has a good armor class, many hit points, enter many henchmen, makes the system very time consuming. And so here he says, okay, I've rethought all this. And this was his first one out as far as deciding, breaking things up, when things are supposed to happen and stuff like this in the round, and making it a little more fluid as opposed to the wargaming aspect of you have the magic phase, missile phase, and then movement and combat phase. This particular one was his first Dragon Magazine article that started diving into that. And then here's the second one, action in the melee round. I guess Dragon Magazine 43, he went in because melee is a source of controversy in AD&D. Oh yeah, they constantly got emails as to how all this stuff is supposed to work. This is dumb, and and it doesn't work right, and it takes too long. So again, he put out another one here, action in the melee round, and there's another one that was released later. I don't remember if it was his. I'd have to go digging up again, which specifically talked about missile weapons. But this was another one of Leonard Lakofka's dives into making combat a little more fluid. And I think he did a pretty good job. These would take a whole lot of practice to just get down and have just flow off the memory.
Yeah, and he was, I find it whenever I get super pedantic about AD&D stuff, which to be honest with you, I've always done. I don't know if I'm just weird or whatever, or specifically detail oriented to a fault. Whenever I get super pedantic about that stuff and detailed and nitpicky, it always makes me happy to find out that a guy that was involved in the game was doing the same thing that I tend to do 45 years ago, but in a different way. So it sort of validates looking at this stuff and trying to come up with ways to make it all make sense and in a way that is maybe a little more simulationist for your game. You have to consider all that carefully, but I find it comforting that he did that long ago.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think a good source of, if you read through these, even if you never look at them or try to from the standpoint of wanting to use them, read through them and you can kind of get an insight into what their mind was when they were writing the game.
Right.
Yeah, great example. Well, darn, we've been running a long time. I didn't expect to get this much out of it. I was scrambling trying to figure out how much are we going to fill a full hour worth of this stuff, but we went way over on it because there's a lot here and there's a lot to digest, and it's good stuff. Good stuff.
And never underestimate my ability to talk too much, and dare I say maybe yours.
Well, I got this button over here. It says remove from stage. So yeah. And then change my address so you don't hunt me down.
Yeah. So what do we want to do for the next one? So we talked about recapping on Sunday, right? So we'll recap on Sunday.
Do a recap on your channel, and then, well, let's see if anybody offers us any suggestions or rule things that they want us to talk about. We might want to dive into some of our favorites. We only touched on weapon speed factor in this one, but I love weapon versus armor class. That is another rule
I do too.
That really makes weapons matter.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And I'd also, I think in this document, there's some other stuff we can look at, the charts at the end or whatever. But the example of melee, because I think it was Michael Dale last time asked us, well, how the hell do you do this? Right?
Oh, okay.
So how the hell do you use it in
why don't
your
we
game?
do that? Next time, let's go ahead and go into the example and read through the example and talk about the different points and stuff that happened on that example. So if anybody has any questions on what we talked about, that example will definitely help clear it up. And yeah, we'll do that next Thursday, barring natural disaster or something like that. We'll jump right in and we'll go over that combat example. And then
right. And then Sunday, if you guys want to interject anything that we put in the show before Thursday, that's what that opportunity is for.
Oh, here we go. Here we got a comment from Gonzalo. Yeah. In some ways, I do agree with his point here, Rollmaster, because a lot of stuff is handled on charts and stuff like this. And if you get fast with those charts, it does fly. It is a game that does fly fairly well.
Right.
It's just different.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking about that on Saturday. Yeah, him and I are going to get together.
Everybody watch on Saturday
at noon and talk about Rollmaster. Yes, I am a multifunctional dungeon master or multi-malfunctional Dungeon Master, if you look at it that way. I like a lot of different game systems. Eventually, I'll be talking about a bunch more, but this is great. This is a fantastic rundown more on first edition Dungeons and Dragons. So I think we'll close this one out here, and next Thursday we'll go into the example. Hey, thanks again for joining me on this, there, Doom Swords. And don't forget,
definitely a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, go, if you're not familiar with Doom Swords, just my channel, go over to his and subscribe to him as well. He's got a lot of insight into this game. All right, so I'll let you go and then holler at you a little later.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining me on another rundown into first edition Dungeons and Dragons. If you enjoyed this content, please, like and subscribe. Leave some comments for us. We definitely want to talk more about this stuff that's going on. If you had additional questions, you didn't get a chance to get it in, put some comments in. If you've got some suggestions for other comments or other content and stuff you'd like to see us do, please, leave that stuff in the comments below. And then thanks again for joining us here on the Great Old Ones channel. I'll try to bring on some more Great Old Ones. And again, like I alluded to on Saturday, we'll be talking more about Rollmaster. So thanks again all, and have a good night.